Well, hello again. It's Grandpa Monty. Onward with the story of Lost on a Mountain in Maine. We are on chapter 3, and yes, I have grown a pair of glasses. Makes it much easier. It's getting a little bit dark. I don't know if you can see out the window. It's just about dark out there, but the snow is piling up. So we're getting ready for Christmas time here. So I wanted to get your Christmas story. It's not really a Christmas story. It's just a story. So anyway, but it's going to be a Christmas present. I love you. So anyway, this is chapter 3. Sharp rocks and sleep. First day. This kid is up on this mountain for quite some time. I knew I couldn't sit where I was very long. Christmas! This wind was sharp, and it blew so hard that the rain and sleet stung like needles. I was getting wet all over. My fleece-lined reefer kept my chest dry, but my blue dungarees were cold and stiff as boards. Dungarees are all right for day hikes and dry hikes, but they're terrible when they get cold and wet. People want to know why I didn't stay where I was. Someone was sure to find me, they say. Well, I'd like to see anyone stay up there in that wind and sleep with the night coming on. You'd freeze stiff before morning. I was already getting stiff. I had to keep moving just to keep warm. I shouted once more, as loud as I could, then I stood and listened. Nothing but that strange noise. I turned slowly about so as to be sure of my direction and started back the way I thought I had come. Pretty soon, I ran right into a trail marker. It said Saddle Trail. Now I was in a fix. I had heard about that trail. I had heard that it went far off into the woods and was dangerous, full of landslides and loose rocks. However, it was a trail, and it was marked, often with blue daubs of paint. It would lead me somewhere, perhaps to some lonely spot miles and miles from camp. No, I mustn't take it. Okay, and there's a footnote there, the little number 7. Go down to the bottom. It says, although the saddle trail is extremely dangerous, had Don been able to follow it, it would have led him down to Chimney Pond, see map, where Roy Dunley's camp is located and which was inhabited that very night. So I've been down to Chimney Pond. I've been there, and it's a really neat place. Okay, back to the main reading. The thing to do is to work off at right angles to it and cut across the main trail. I started on. Right away, I ran into more pucker bush. I climbed over it and fell through and climbed under it. Guides have said no one could crawl under it, but I did for a long ways. Pretty soon I was back among big rocks again. Right here I had a funny experience. The cloud opened just for an instant, and far, far below me I saw a lake I thought was Moosehead shining in the sun. The cloud closed and the lake was gone, and everything was dull gray again. That sight cheered me some, and I hurried faster than ever. I started to run and found I couldn't because of the boulders, that made me frantic, and I climbed over them like a cat and yelled and shouted and cried all that time. I yelled for my dad. I climbed up as high as I could on a big rock and screamed for him. Then I waited. No answering shout, nothing. Just beep. Page 14. Just the noise of that wind and purring sound of fine sleet driving against my clothes. I just had to get out of there and back to the trail. I started to run again as fast as I could. I don't know how long I kept that up, but a long time. Over rocks and sharp edges and things I stumbled over and into patches of pucker bush, sometimes falling and then getting up again, and often crawling under the brush on my hands and knees. Boy, was it awful! And then, just when the cloud lifted again and I thought sunlight might break through, I ran into another trail sign. It said Saddle Trail and looked like the sign I'd seen before. I was pretty scared by this time, and I wasn't sure about that sign, so I examined it closely. There was a mark on it that I recalled seeing before. I had come back the same way again. He'd gone in a full circle. Ah, that's awful. I had come back to the same sign. For a second, I was stunned. I just stood there and looked at it. I knew now for sure that I was lost. I was running in a circle. I didn't know what to do, so I stumbled along, hunting for other marks on that same trail. I guess I went a long way over rocks and over pucker bush, and sometimes under too, searching and hunting for another trail marker. I didn't find any, but I kept going down. When you're on a mountain and you're lost, you probably want to go down. I remember that. After a while, I came to a place where there was a lot of gravel, and boy, was it slippery. That place was dangerous, for a slip might mean a bad fall. Maybe 100 feet or more. I slowed down. I could imagine myself lying there in the cold and dark with a sprained ankle. Meanwhile, the rocks were getting bigger and bigger. There's a picture of the mountain. Somebody sitting there looking at it. Beep. Page 16. At last, I came to a weather-beaten tree. The branches were all pulled out to one side, as though the tree were trying to get away from something. That tree looked scared. Beyond was another and another. I had reached the timberline, and I had to find a trail because the shrubs grew as thick as doormats, and without a trail, the going down to camp would be pretty bad. The sight of that tree calmed me down a bit, for I began to think more clearly. It's an awful thing to get lost in the clouds. You see things that aren't there at all. Rocks look like people and shaggy animals, and often you come to an edge and think you are looking down into space, and you draw back and you get scared. It really is. There's huge drop-offs on this mountain. Huge drop-offs. The mountain suddenly seemed awfully big under me. I listened only the whining noise of the wind in the stunted trees. No, there was another noise. Rocks falling. Far off to the right. A slow, heavy crunching sound, then silence, deeper than before. The rocks in this place had very sharp edges, and some of them were loose too, and had from under me. And slid from under me. I had heard of landslides and had seen the remains of a few on the way up. I kept thinking of how a landslide starts, the slipping stones. Just a few at first, then more and more and faster until the whole mountain seems to move. Then trees tip over like matches, and there are crashings and grindings and dust. Boy! I just stood still now and then and shivered. What chance would a fellow have in a mess like that? However, it was not quite so cold down there in the shrub, and that made me think that further down it would be still warmer. Maybe I'd better change my course a little to the right and keep going down. I hunted for an opening through the scrub growth. There wasn't any, so I just had to scramble along as best I could. That's where I cut my sneakers to pieces. Footnote number 8. Go to the bottom of the page, 8. The stones are so sharp on parts of Mount Katahdin, says veteran guide Earl York, that a pair of new, heavy sneakers will not last over 6 trips, even when the regular trail is followed. So Katahdin is really hard on shoes. I can tell you that personally. I went up there and those rocks are so sharp they just tear at your feet. I noticed now that I had to scramble through more and more of those scrubby bushes. My face was badly scratched and I was awfully tired. It was getting dark now. Ooh. I knew I hadn't covered more than 3 or 4 miles. That meant that Dad and Henry couldn't be a long way off. The camp must be right down below me in the trees. I felt a little better. What if it were hard going down to it? A fellow could make it, as long as he didn't break a leg or something. I'd just go a little more slowly. That's the way a fellow figures things out. I was all wrong, of course. There wasn't any camp below me, not for miles and miles, and there weren't any trails where I was going. It's a good thing I didn't know any more than I did. Sometimes not knowing the worst helps a fellow along. If he just keeps going and doesn't lose his head. The trees grew taller and taller. Going was easier than at first, and the air was warmer and not quite so soaked with mist. There was no sleet. I could see a little ways ahead. Beep. Just broken mountainside with bushes and trees everywhere. No use to shout now. No one could hear me. Just one thing to do, work my way down to the camp. Maybe I'd be late for bacon and beans, but what of it? Dad might be mad because I didn't stay with Henry and the man, but he wouldn't hold anything like that against me for very long. Just as I was thinking over such thing, I slipped off a big rock and hurt myself. Oh, that's when you're really cold, man, that must really hurt. I lay at the base of it, kind of stunned. At last I got to my feet again. I saw that night was falling. The woods were clearing of mist but getting dark. I knew it was raining, but where I was, the trees protected me a little. Though drops kept falling and wetting my hair, I thought over what I ought to do for a long time. Then I decided to sleep right there for the night. Before I bedded down under a big tree, I scouted around a bit and found a small stream. I knew then I was near the foot of the mountain. I was a hungry boy. I wished I hadn't eaten all my raisins on the way up. A raisin would have tasted good. I was thirsty too, so I took a drink. Then I took off my sneakers and dabbed my feet in the water. Christmas, I was surprised. Those sneakers were clashed all over. When my feet felt better, I got up and started towards the tree. On the way back, I saw a cave. It looked deep and dry, but I was afraid of it. I picked up a rock and threw it in. I could hear it bounce inside. Nothing happened. I thought it would be a good place to sleep in and get out of the cold and rain, but I was afraid of some animal coming home in the night. So I passed it up and went back to that big tree. It had two roots that ran out like arms. I got a little moss together in the hollow and lay down. I curled myself up into a ball and pulled my reefer down over my legs. The dungarees bothered me. They were wet and cold and as stiff as boards, so I got up and took them off. I put them and my sneakers under an old rotted tree trunk to keep them as dry as possible. I said my prayers and laid down and shut my eyes. I was more comfortable, but awfully wet and cold and hungry. Things look different at night in the woods, especially when a fellow is alone. Maybe a first-class scout who had timber experience wouldn't mind, but I did. I listened for a long time. Some queer bird screamed in the distance. Ha! Ha! Kind of scary. Ha! 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 Yeah, I gotta practice my bird calls. Something fell on the mountain. A frog croaked. The mosquitoes were thick too, and I kept slapping them off my face and neck. At last, I stripped off my blue shirt and wound it around my head. My fleece-lined reefer covered me down to my waist, and I could draw my legs up under it too. My feet gave me the most trouble. I couldn't cover them very well, and they were awfully cold. I kept thinking of Mommy and Dad and wondering about them, and then I said some more prayers, and I felt better inside. I felt that God would help me if I needed help. I woke up once or twice, and each time I wondered about Mommy and Dad. I felt awfully sorry about what had happened, for I knew Dad was out on the mountain somewhere looking for me. And there's a footnote, number 9. As a matter of fact, Mr. Fendler and a small searching party were already looking for the boy at this time. For a complete description of the organized hunt at which several hundred people took part, see afterwards. I knew that up on top it was cold, pretty near freezing, and I blamed myself for not sticking close to Dad and the boys on the hike up. If I had done that, I would be safe in my cot bed in camp, and I cried myself to sleep. When I opened my eyes again, it was morning, and rain was still falling, but not heavily. I couldn't figure out for a moment where I was, and then I remembered. Just below me was a little open space through which the stream ran. Beyond it was an old stump, all hazy with mist and drizzly rain. I was shivering and unhappy. That's the end of chapter 3.